At the most intense moment of the night, Elias took to the stage with the weight of the truth burning in his throat. He knew that every word he spoke could destroy or save his life. "How many times do we hide behind good deeds to mask our faults?" he began, looking directly at the crowd. "And what would happen if all the lies we told to protect our image were finally exposed?" The question hung in the air like a sentence, leaving everyone in the room fixated on the next revelation, unable to look away. Elias had everything most people could wish for: an incalculable fortune, a busy social life, and public respect for his work with charity. He was seen as a successful man, but behind the appearances, there was a coldness and indifference that distanced him from any real connection. For him, donation numbers were just numbers. What happened to the needy people he helped was irrelevant. It was an ordinary day for Elias, walking through the busy streets of the city, where luxury and misery intertwined in a way that was invisible to many. He was concentrating on a business call when, as he turned a corner, his eyes met Luana's. She was sitting on the ground, covered in a blanket. Sitting on the ground, covered in a dirty, torn coat. The young homeless woman seemed invisible to everyone around her, but not to Elias. There was something about her, a sparkle in her eyes, a presence he couldn't ignore. Without understanding exactly why, Elias approached her. "How much do you want?" he asked, as if it were just any transaction. Luana looked at him in surprise, not knowing whether to answer or run away. There, something began to change, although he didn't know it yet. Elias watched her with the same coldness with which he conducted his business. "I have a proposition for you," he said bluntly. Luana, still confused, hesitated before answering. "What?" Her voice sounded incredulous, but curious. Elias explained his plan bluntly. He would pay her to be his date to a charity gala that evening. He believed that taking someone like her, someone who clearly came from the streets, would be a perfect move to promote his image as a philanthropist. Luana didn't know what to think. Part of her was tempted by the promise of easy money, while another part was revolted by the coldness of the proposal. However, her desperate situation didn't leave her many options. "Do you accept?" asked Elias, impassive. As Elias prepared her for the event, he noticed something different about Luana. She wasn't like the other people he had superficially helped in the past. Her gaze was heavy, marked by experiences that went beyond what poverty alone could explain. As he dressed her in an elegant rented dress, Luana let slip a name: Jonas. Elias raised his eyebrows when he heard this, his interest piqued. "Jonas?" he asked. She looked away, clearly annoyed. "It doesn't matter," he replied quickly, trying to put an end to the subject. But for Elias, that name brought back uncomfortable memories. Jonas was an old business rival, someone with whom he had had severe conflicts. The mystery behind Luana was only just beginning to unfold, and Elias was now even more intrigued. The hall was filled with distinguished guests, full of luxury and opulence. Camera flashes captured every detail of the evening as the rich and powerful mingled. Elias arrived at the event alongside Luana, now transformed by her makeup and dress. Although she looked impeccable, Luana still felt uncomfortable in her surroundings. The stares she received made her feel even more out of place. Elias, for his part, wore a calculated smile. He knew that his presence with Luana would make an impact, a move designed to reinforce his image as a philanthropist. Jonas approached with his usual enigmatic smile. "Elias, what a surprise to see you here," he said, with a slight irony. His eyes turned to Luana, and a mischievous glint crossed his face. Elias realized right away that Jonas already knew about the plan. "Nice move. Bringing someone from the street to an event like this, it'll impress, no doubt," continued Jonas. Then his expression changed. "But you know, I have a proposal for you too. Either you withdraw from the foundation, or these photos of the two of you will destroy your reputation forever." Elias tensed up. The threat was on. After the confrontation, Elias took Luana to a more secluded corner, away from prying eyes. He needed answers. "Who are you really?" he asked, more seriously than before. Luana hesitated, but knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. "Jonas. He threatened me. He said that if I didn't do what he wanted, he would destroy the only thing I have left, my dignity," she said, her eyes watering. Elias, until then unperturbed, felt a discomfort he couldn't explain. He used me to hurt you, but I'm not just a piece in his game. I didn't want to do that. For the first time, Elias saw the humanity in Luana, and the weight of his own actions began to become unbearable. After hearing Luana's confession, Elias stood back for a moment, absorbing the weight of everything he had just discovered. For the first time, his impeccably controlled life seemed to crumble before his eyes. He had always seen charity as a way of keeping his image untarnished, but now, confronted with the truth, it all seemed empty. He looked at Luana, realizing that she wasn't just a figure to be used in his plans, but someone real, with a story marked by pain and survival. Guilt began to grow inside him, a new and uncomfortable feeling. How had he, who prided himself on helping others, allowed himself to be so blind to the realities of the people he claimed to want to save? Jonas reappeared at the end of the night, with his characteristic, cynical smile. "Now you know the truth, Elias," he said, slowly approaching. "Either you hand over your foundation to me, or today's story will destroy everything you've built." Elijah felt the pressure of the decision he had to make. Jonas was determined to use Luana to ruin his reputation and take control of his professional life. What had once seemed like simple manipulation was now becoming a complex moral dilemma. Jonas continued, "You know the press will love this story. A young homeless girl being used by the great Elias. How do you think that will play out?" Elias was on the edge of the abyss. The decision he would make that night would change the course of his life forever. His eyes met Luana's, who, despite everything, seemed to trust him to do the right thing. "I'm not going to give in," said Elias, his voice firm. "You can do whatever you want, Jonas, but I won't allow someone else to suffer because of your ambition." Jonas looked at him, surprised by his sudden courage. Elias knew he was risking everything, his reputation, his foundation, and his fortune. But at that moment, he chose something greater, Luana's dignity and his own redemption. The next day, during the closing ceremony of the charity event, Elias took to the stage, in front of an attentive audience and journalists eager for any scandal. He knew that Jonas was ready to release the compromising photos, but he took charge of the situation. "Today, I'd like to talk about something that goes beyond donations and numbers," he began. "It's about dignity and how we sometimes forget that behind every statistic, there are real lives. I forgot that. I lost myself." Elias looked at Luana in the audience. His public confession was an attempt to repair the mistake he had made. He was exposing the truth before Jonas could manipulate the narrative. Luana, overcome by a mixture of nervousness and courage, stood up after Elias' words. She knew that this was the moment when she had to share her own truth. She took to the stage, the silence in the room deafening. "I'm Luana, and I was used by Jonas to try and ruin Elias' life. But the truth is that he didn't use me. He gave me a chance when I needed it most. He may have made a mistake, but today I see the change in him." The crowd was in shock, and Jonas suddenly lost all the power he thought he had over the situation. After exposing the truth, Elijah not only saved his reputation, but transformed his life. He reorganized his foundation to really help the marginalized, this time with Luana by his side, not as an act of charity, but as someone who understood the struggles and could lead the transformation. Together, they began a new chapter, focused on real change and true empathy. Elias knew that life would never be the same. He couldn't change the past, but he could decide how he would act in the future. And, alongside Luana, he was ready for that.